Toby Corley was sitting at the end of the bench when he heard the head coach say it. "You change oil for a living, Wade." Kurt Delaney made sure the parents behind the dugout could hear the rest. "Leave the championship to a real coach." Two fathers in the front row laughed. A woman beside them smiled into her cup. Nobody told Kurt to stop. Toby was 11 years old. He looked down at his glove and pretended he had not heard his father's name used like a punch line. Wade did not answer. He opened the small notebook resting on his knee, wrote down one more pitch, and closed it again. Less than 2 hours later, with 2 outs in the final inning and the championship run standing on second base, Wade would stand up and call one play before it happened. Somebody in those same bleachers would laugh at him again. Then his son would move 2 steps, and the game would end in the patch of dirt Wade had pointed to before the pitch. Wade Corley repaired diesel engines 6 days a week. On Sundays, he coached for free. Officially, he was the volunteer bench coach. He charted hitters. He warmed up the infielders. He kept track of pitch tendencies and quietly passed what he saw to Kurt between innings. The lineup belonged to Kurt. The substitutions belonged to Kurt. Every pitch call belonged to Kurt. Kurt made sure Wade remembered that. Kurt owned the largest car dealership in the county. His name was on 2 banners beyond the outfield fence. 3 of the team's biggest sponsors bought their trucks from him. He carried himself like the baseball program was another business he had built. Wade carried a notebook. Every hitter got a page: first pitch, 2 strikes, runners on, fastball in, breaking ball away. What the hitter chased, what he stopped doing when the count tightened. Wade's father had taught him to watch that way. "The game usually tells you what is coming," he used to say, "but only after everybody else gets too loud to hear it." Wade had always been good at staying quiet. He was raising Toby alone. Money was thin. The old work truck needed a transmission. The kitchen roof leaked above the sink. And Toby was the reason Wade still found 7 hours every Sunday to stand behind a chain-link fence and keep notes for a man who rarely listened. For most of that season, Toby had barely left the bench. Kurt said the other boys had more travel experience. He said championship baseball was not the place to experiment. He said Toby was dependable in practice, but untested under pressure. What he did not say was that the starting second baseman's father had paid for new uniforms. Before the championship began, Kurt found Wade alone near the equipment bag. His voice was friendly. That was how Kurt delivered things he did not want challenged. "Be patient with me today." He nodded toward Toby. "Next season I'll make sure he has a place." Then Kurt lowered his voice. "And I'll put him in the fall development camp." Wade knew the price. $2,000 for 1 week, meals not included. He could not afford it that year. He was not certain he could afford it the next. Kurt put a hand on his shoulder. "Let me run my game and I'll take care of your boy." For one long second, Wade nearly accepted. The word yes had already reached the back of his teeth. Then he looked toward the bench. Toby was helping another player tighten his cleats. The boy had learned how to make himself useful while waiting. Wade swallowed the word. He gave Kurt no answer. By noon, the championship field was packed. Grandparents sat under umbrellas. Children chased foul balls beyond the fence. Someone's father ran the scoreboard from a folding table and an old laptop. Kurt's team took a 4-3 lead into the 3rd inning. Then his second baseman misplayed a routine ground ball. It bounced beneath the boy's glove and rolled into shallow right field. Between innings, Wade stepped close enough that only Kurt should have heard him. "Toby can cover that side." Kurt turned toward the bench. Then he raised his voice. "You want me to put your son into a county championship?" The parents behind the dugout looked over. Kurt smiled as though Wade had made a harmless joke. Watching games does not make somebody a coach. He pointed toward the bench with 2 fingers. "Sit down." Then he added the line that made the front row laugh. Leave this to somebody who has actually won one. Toby was warming up a pitcher along the fence. His glove stopped halfway to his chest, only for a second. Then he pulled the strap tighter. He looked at the dirt, and his shoulders dropped just enough for his father to see. That was the part Wade felt, not the laughter, not the insult. The way Toby became smaller so nobody would notice he had heard it. Wade did not defend himself. He did not tell Kurt what he thought of the lineup. He sat down, opened the notebook, and kept watching. The opposing team's best hitter came up twice more. Wade marked both at bats. With fewer than 2 strikes, the boy hunted the inside half. He opened his hips early and tried to pull everything toward left field. But with 2 strikes he changed. His front shoulder stayed closed, his hands dropped. And when pitchers gave him a changeup away, he reached for it and rolled a soft ground ball toward the right side. He had done it once in the semifinal. He did it again in the 4th inning of the championship. Wade drew a small line on the page beside both pitches. Same count, same pitch, same result. By the top of the 6th, Kurt's team still led 4-3. In that league, the 6th inning was the last. The first batter reached when Kurt's second baseman made his second error of the game. The next batter walked. A sacrifice moved both runners over. Then a shallow fly ball gave them the second out without allowing the tying run to score. 2 outs, runners on second and third. 1 run would tie the game, 2 would win it, and the other team's hottest hitter walked toward the plate. The bleachers stopped sounding like a crowd and started sounding like hundreds of people holding the same breath. Kurt paced the front of the dugout. He looked at the catcher. He looked at the scoreboard. He looked anywhere except at Wade. Wade already had the notebook open. The hitter fouled off a fastball, strike 1. He took a curve low. Then he chased another fastball at the top of the zone, strike 2. Wade looked at the hitter's feet. The front foot had moved closer to the plate. The hands had dropped. The same adjustment, the same 2-strike approach. Wade knew what Kurt's catcher would want next. The changeup low and away had worked against that hitter all weekend. He also knew what would happen if he spoke. The free camp would disappear. Toby's promised place next season could disappear with it. Kurt controlled the roster. Kurt controlled the program. And Wade was only the mechanic who had been told to sit down. Toby sat at the end of the bench with his glove already on. He was not asking to play. That somehow made it worse. Wade looked down at the 2 small lines in the notebook. Then he stood. Kurt, the coach, did not turn. Wade said it again, put Toby at second. Kurt looked at him, as though Wade had chosen the worst possible moment to become difficult. There are 2 strikes and the season is on the line. I know. You want me to change the defense now. Your second baseman is protecting the bag. Wade held up the notebook. This hitter has rolled over the outside changeup twice this weekend with 2 strikes. Kurt glanced at the page but did not take it. Wade continued. If you go low and away again, he is likely to put it on the ground to the right side. Likely. That is the read. Wade pointed toward second base. Toby has the first step for it. He moved his finger slightly toward the first base side of the bag. Shift him 2 steps that way. A voice behind the dugout called out, "Let the real coach handle it, Wade." A few nervous laughs followed. Not the whole crowd, just enough for Toby to hear it. Kurt stared through the fence at his second baseman. The boy had already made 2 errors. He looked at Toby, then at the count. Then at the catcher, who was already signaling that he wanted the changeup. Kurt's face tightened. He was not giving Wade control. He was deciding whether Wade's information was useful. Finally, Kurt called time. He made the defensive substitution himself. Then he gave the catcher the sign himself. Toby ran toward second base for his first championship inning of the season. As he crossed the infield, he looked once toward the dugout. Wade touched 2 fingers to the edge of his notebook. Then he pointed toward the first base side of the bag. Toby shifted 2 steps. The pitcher came set. The runner at third danced down the line. The pitch left his hand. Changeup, low, away, the hitter reached. His front shoulder opened late. The barrel came over the top of the ball. A slow grounder skipped toward the middle, not directly at Toby, far enough to his right that the original second baseman would have needed a perfect first step. Toby already had it. He crossed behind the bag, backhanded the ball, planted, and threw across his body. The first baseman stretched. The ball hit leather. The umpire's fist went up. Out. The runner from third crossed the plate half a second too late. The game was over. For a moment, no one celebrated. The heckling behind the dugout stopped. The catcher turned toward Wade before he turned toward the pile, forming near first base. The umpire looked from the spot where Toby had started to the place where he had fielded the ball. Kurt opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then the field erupted. Players ran toward Toby. Parents came out of their seats. The scoreboard operator reached for the final button with both hands shaking. But the people who had laughed were no longer looking at the field. They were looking at the man beside the bench, and at the notebook still open in his hand. At the trophy presentation, League Director Hollis Wren handed Kurt the microphone. Kurt thanked the players. He thanked the parents. He thanked the sponsors. Then he reached the last play. "Great reaction by Toby," he said, "and a good break on the ball." The opposing coach stood near the first base line. It was more than a good break. His voice carried without a microphone. The bench coach called the pitch and moved the boy before it was thrown. Parents near him nodded. They had heard it too. The noise around the trophy table faded. Hollis looked toward Wade, then back at Kurt. "Was the defensive shift your call?" Kurt rubbed his thumb along the microphone. "No." "Was the pitch recommendation yours?" Kurt looked toward the bleachers, then at the notebook in Wade's hand. "The pitch was mine to approve." Hollis waited. Kurt knew the question had not been answered. Finally, he said it. "The read came from Wade." Hollis tilted the microphone closer. "Wade who?" Kurt's jaw tightened. "Wade Corley." "And the substitution?" Kurt looked at Toby, still holding the game ball near the edge of the infield. Wade asked for Toby. The front row was completely quiet now. Hollis gave Kurt one final chance to say it plainly. "So the championship play came from Coach Corley's scouting?" Kurt stared at the grass. "Yes." The word barely carried. Hollis did not move the microphone away. Kurt lifted his head. "Yes," he said again. "Wade saw it." He looked toward Wade for the first time since the final out. "I didn't." There was no applause for the admission. There did not need to be. The parents who had laughed had stopped smiling. The catcher nodded once toward Wade. The opposing coach folded his arms and watched Kurt finish. Kurt drew a breath. Then he added something Wade had not asked him to say. "And I should have given Toby more chances before today." That was as close as Kurt could come to naming the whole season. For Wade, it was enough for that moment. Hollis raised the microphone. The final out was recorded by number 12, Toby Corley. Toby looked toward his father. On the defensive call from volunteer coach Wade Corley, Toby kept looking at him. The other players were waiting for the trophy. The photographers were waiting for everyone to face forward. But Toby lifted the game ball and called toward the microphone. "Can you say his name again?" Hollis looked at Wade, then he said it slowly. "Coach Wade Corley." Toby's shoulders came back, not dramatically, just enough to undo what had happened beside the fence. Wade never asked for Kurt's job. He did not ask for an apology in front of the parents. Later, when the field had emptied, he asked for one thing. "If Toby earns innings next season, I want the standard written down." Kurt said nothing. "The same standard for every boy," Wade continued. "Not sponsors, not promises, performance." Kurt looked toward second base, where the dirt still showed the mark from Toby's first step. Then he nodded. On the drive home, Toby placed the game ball on the dashboard of Wade's old work truck. The ball rolled each time the truck turned. At the next red light, Toby caught it. He rotated it until the dirt-scuffed side faced his father. Wade glanced at it. Neither of them spoke. They had already heard the name twice. Wade could have stayed quiet and protected Toby's place next season. Instead, he stood up when the game and his son needed him. Was that his responsibility as a coach? Or was it the one moment a father could not afford to remain silent? Tell me which choice you would have made.